My name is Ruth Drescher. I was born in Stuttgart, Germany in 1934. It was really a terribly difficult time. My mother already had 3 children. She was 40. Hitler was on the scene, and she had another baby, me. And one of the early memories I have is, I guess I was probably about 4, because I was 5 when we left. And we lived in an apartment building in Stuttgart in a nice residential area. And there was a little group of children playing in the courtyard of our apartment building. And one of the mothers came out to this little courtyard, and she gave out some candy. All the children got 2 pieces of candy. There were maybe 6 or 7 children, and I got 1. And I looked at my 1 piece of candy, and I was really unhappy. And so I said to the little girl who was the daughter of the mother who did that, I said, "So how come you all got 2 pieces and I just got 1? And she, without said, "That's because you're Jewish." Now, as I have reflected on that over the years, it's extremely unlikely that that mother put that much thought into it. She just had an uneven number of candies, right? That's kind of the height of what I experienced, by way of saying I was very lucky. My brother, who was the eldest, and my older sister, they left early. They left Germany mid-30s. And then the other 4 of us, my mother, my father, and my other sister, Margot, we were able to get out in 1939. I think it was right after Kristallnacht. I knew it had to be with being Jewish and that we were no longer safe. I remember on Kristallnacht being in the apartment and my mother saying, "If anyone comes to the door, don't open the door." And I remembered the knock on the door that all the women talked about, that they were afraid of. And my mother answered the door, and it was a couple of guys in Gestapo uniforms, you know. They were picking up men. They asked where my father was, but in fact, he had been invited by a non-Jewish friend of his to go into his country house until this was all over. And she said he was away on business. I have a fairly pronounced memory of that night. I think it was the next morning, we looked out of the window and we saw that my sister's school was burning. And I remember leaving, going through the border between Germany and Holland, and I had a little red bag, and I wore them across our shoulders. And the Gestapo were looking through things that people had, and they said, "Oh, you're a nice little girl. You don't have anything in that bag, right?" And I said, "No, I don't have it." And my mother had really given some thought to putting some jewelry into my bag, and then she thought she wasn't going to risk it. I think maybe the very next day, we were on a ship to New York. It was thrilling. My mother and my sister were seasick the whole time. So my father and I had a blast. I mean, my father was the fun guy in the family, but he and I were fortunate enough not to get seasick. And he took me all over, and I saw my first movie on the ship. My father just played the whole thing down. He said, it's all going to be over. You know, there's always been anti-Semitism. But my mother didn't, and my mother started to take English lessons. I said, why do you want to learn English? And she said, because we're going to a country where that's the language. We're going to America. My mother had a lot of family in New York, and I think people, they just saw the handwriting on the wall, get out, get out, get out. We never got any of the belongings that were packed up into crates. We got to New York. My father opened his own kosher butcher store, and then I went to school. I started right in kindergarten. I was just the right age to start kindergarten. I remember there was one little girl who said to me, so you came from Germany? And I said, yes. And she said, well, then I think we should just call you Miss Hitler. I don't know that I was all that upset about it, but when I came home and told my mother, she was horrified. I was excited about becoming an American. As I got older, I began to get what it means to be an all-American girl. You know, for me, it was not a terrible experience, I can say that. But I was aware of what it was like for other members of my family. How I feel now, I feel incredibly lucky. I feel grateful to my parents that they did what they had to do. They lost everything. They came with a couple of suitcases. You know, I'm always very ready to talk about my experience. There aren't too many of us left who can do that. And mine was certainly not the worst. It was certainly not the worst. I think the fact that people want to know, and that I'm one of the few people who has that information. So I feel obliged to share it. It's all out there, the books, whatever, but to hear a story from somebody who's really experienced it, it's what I can do. It's not much, but it's a little bit I can do. Any students who we'd be talking to now have to be very grateful for what they have, but to always keep in mind that there are people who do not have the blessings that they have, and to be always considerate and understanding of people who have suffered in other ways. Don't make judgments about other people because of their race or their religion or their circumstance, and recognize what that can lead to. I think that's the message that I would bring.